In the vast expanse of the universe, where countless species vie for power and dominance, a sudden and unlikely bond began to form, one that would challenge the very fabric of fate itself. An alien girl, born into a race whose sole mission was to conquer, had no reason to see humanity as anything more than another weak, primitive species. To her, the human race was little more than an obstacle, a stepping stone in the greater scheme of her people's expansion. She was raised to fight, to conquer, and to bring victory to her people. Her destiny, as set by her ancestors, was one of power, strength, and unwavering loyalty to her race. But destiny, it seems, had other plans. On a routine mission to infiltrate a human colony, the alien girl found herself in a situation she couldn't have predicted. Trapped in a hostile territory with no way of escape, she was forced into an encounter with a human who, despite their differences, saw her not as an enemy but as someone to be understood. This human, far from the ruthless soldier she was used to encountering, had a kindness and depth that unsettled her. For the first time, she began questioning everything she had been taught. Could it be that her understanding of humans was entirely wrong? That there was more to them than what her people had led her to believe? As time passed, the two found themselves at odds with their respective factions, both of them struggling to reconcile their beliefs with the reality of what they had come to understand. The alien girl, who had once seen her mission as a duty to her people, now found herself torn between her loyalty to her race and her growing feelings for the very species she had been sent to destroy. The human, equally conflicted, found himself unable to view her as the enemy she had once been, realizing that beneath the cold exterior of the alien was someone more complex, more human than he ever expected. But fate is never simple, and as the world around them grows ever more dangerous, their bond is tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. The alien girl and the human find themselves on a collision course, with forces beyond their control, both from within and without. As the conflict intensifies, they must face impossible choices that will decide not only their own futures, but the fate of both their species. In a world that demands loyalty and sacrifice, can love truly survive? Or will their forbidden connection tear them apart? With every passing day, the tension between them grows, the stakes higher and higher, until they are left with a choice: betray everything they've come to know, or sacrifice their chance at a life together. The future is uncertain, and the weight of destiny is heavy on their shoulders. What started as a simple mission, a chance encounter, has turned into something much more complicated, a story of love, loyalty, and the clash between duty and desire. In the end, the question remains: can a bond between an enemy and a lover truly change the course of history? Or is their love doomed to fail under the crushing weight of a universe that has no room for such defiance? Only time will tell, but one thing is for certain: their journey is far from over. The alien girl, known only as Lyra among her people, had grown up in a world where strength and obedience were the foundations of existence. Raised within the cold walls of a military academy designed to prepare her for the grand mission of galactic conquest, she had known little else but the doctrine of her race. The beings she was part of, known for their advanced technology and ruthless tactics, had always seen humanity as a primitive species, unworthy of attention beyond subjugation. But Lyra had always been different. Even from a young age, she questioned the harsh teachings of her elders, wondering whether the constant conquest and violence were truly the path her people were destined for. Her doubts were buried deep, however, beneath layers of training and indoctrination. Her mission, now clear and undeniable, was simple: infiltrate, conquer, and secure humanity's resources for her people's survival. Earth's human population, despite their fierce will to survive, was no match for the highly advanced weapons and strategies her race had perfected over millennia. It was a straightforward task, one that she had been assigned to complete with precision. Yet, when Lyra first set foot on Earth, something about the planet unsettled her. The human culture was chaotic, unpredictable, yet full of an inexplicable warmth and potential that intrigued her. The mission had been easy at first, blending in, observing, reporting on human weaknesses. But then, everything changed. During one of her covert operations, she was discovered, not by a soldier or a trained fighter, but by a civilian. A human who had no formal training but possessed something that her highly advanced race could never have anticipated: a quiet resilience. There was no fear in his eyes when he saw her. Instead, there was curiosity. And in those fleeting moments, something inside Lyra shifted. For the first time, she saw a human as more than an obstacle, more than a target to be neutralized. This human, with his simple life and humble desires, did not fit the mold of her enemies. His name, she learned, was Adam. He was a mechanic, far from a soldier or any kind of threat. Yet, his understanding of machines and his capacity for empathy made him an enigma. It was in his eyes that she saw a flicker of understanding, something beyond the cold, calculated nature of her own race. He saw her, not as a weapon, not as an enemy, but as a person. The sudden realization that her mission, her entire purpose, had been built on a lie was more than she could bear. The rules she had been raised with began to crumble in her mind. Adam, for his part, was equally confused by his growing connection to her. He had never believed in aliens, at least not in the way his government would have liked him to. His life had been grounded in the mechanics of everyday survival, fixing things, building things, trying to make sense of a world that seemed intent on self-destruction. The last thing he expected was to find an alien stranded and seemingly vulnerable in his workshop. But Lyra wasn't like the monstrous invaders he had seen on the news. She wasn't an enemy. She was something else entirely. They spoke for hours that day, their words slow, careful, as though testing the waters. It was a dangerous thing, what they were doing. Both of them knew that. If Lyra's people discovered her disobedience, her betrayal would be swift and merciless. And Adam, well, if he was caught harboring an alien invader, it would mean the end of his life, or worse. But neither of them could stop themselves. There was a deep, unspoken understanding between them, something neither could deny, even if it made no sense. As the days turned into weeks, their secret meetings became more frequent. Lyra's internal conflict only deepened. She had been trained to be ruthless, to follow orders without hesitation. Yet, here she was, defying those very orders for a human someone she was supposed to hate, someone whose race she had been taught to see as nothing but a stepping stone. Every moment spent with Adam pulled her further from her mission, further from the life she had known. Adam, too, found himself torn. The more he learned about Lyra, the more he realized that everything he had believed about the universe, about aliens, was wrong. She was not the cold, calculating enemy he had imagined. Instead, she was like him, in many ways confused, searching for meaning and struggling against the limitations of her own existence. Her story, her struggles, mirrored his own in some strange way. She was a prisoner of her circumstances, just as he was. The truth was, Adam found himself captivated by Lyra in ways he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her alien nature that drew him in. It was the vulnerability in her eyes, the uncertainty she carried beneath her strong exterior. He had seen that same uncertainty in his own reflection, a feeling of being trapped in a world that didn't quite make sense. And despite the danger of their connection, despite the consequences of betrayal, Adam could not bring himself to turn away from her. But fate, as always, was not so kind. Lyra's disappearance from the alien ranks did not go unnoticed for long. Her absence was mocked, her whereabouts questioned, and the hunt for her intensified. Soon, the very forces she had once been loyal to began closing in on her. And when the news of her betrayal reached the highest echelons of her people, it was clear there would be no easy resolution. Her people were not ones to forgive. Yet, as the tension between the two sides mounted, something unexpected happened. Lyra began to question her own loyalty, her own beliefs, and the very foundation of the world she had come from. Adam had awakened something in her, a part of herself she had never known existed, something deeply human, something that no amount of training or indoctrination could suppress. The choice before her was stark. To return to her people, to end this dangerous liaison and reclaim her place as a soldier, or to stay with Adam, to defy her past and risk everything for a future that was uncertain at best. Every day that passed brought the walls of her reality closer until they seemed ready to collapse entirely. But even as Lyra wrestled with her decision, the world outside was shifting. Adam had been keeping an eye on the rising tensions between the alien forces and the human resistance. The war that had been brewing in the background was now reaching a boiling point, and it was no longer just a matter of individual survival. Lyra's choice would have far-reaching consequences, not just for her, but for both races. And so, as the inevitable storm approached, both Lyra and Adam stood at the crossroads of fate, two individuals bound by circumstances far larger than themselves, struggling to define their own destiny in a universe that seemed determined to control it for them. Would their forbidden bonds survive the coming chaos? Or would the forces of destiny tear them apart before they could ever truly understand what it meant to be human, to be free? Only time would tell, and the clock was ticking. The air in Adam's workshop had grown heavier with each passing day. The sense of impending disaster, which had once seemed a distant threat, now felt immediate, as if the universe itself was closing in on them. Lyra and Adam spent more and more time together, knowing full well that the risk of discovery was higher than ever. The whispers of rebellion from Earth's resistance forces were beginning to reach the alien commanders, and their presence on Earth was becoming more brazen, more aggressive. Adam could feel it in his bones. The world around them was shifting, teetering on the edge of something far beyond their control. Lyra, once confident in her ability to blend in and maintain control, was now unraveling. She had been raised to believe that humans were weak, inferior beings to be dominated and ruled. Yet, in the presence of Adam, her convictions were being tested in ways she hadn't thought possible. Her mind was a battleground of conflicting thoughts. The power of her alien heritage, the teachings of her people, all seemed so distant and foreign now, drowned out by the undeniable pull of something human. The warmth of Adam's gaze, the strength in his simple actions, had stripped her of her former certainty. But Lyra wasn't the only one feeling the weight of their situation. Adam, too, felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. The world he had known, the life he had lived, was now a fleeting memory. He was caught between the loyalty to his species and the powerful emotions he had developed for the alien girl who had once been his enemy. He had always lived a life of simplicity, but now the complexity of the situation threatened to consume him. The world was on the brink of chaos, and neither he nor Lyra could escape the coming storm. The moment of truth approached like a freight train, inevitable and unstoppable. As the alien forces began tightening their grip on Earth, Lyra received a message, one that could not be ignored. Her superiors knew of her defection. They had tracked her movements, monitored her communications, and now they were coming for her. The decision she had put off for so long, whether to return to her people or defy them for a life she had never dreamed of, had to be made now. The clock was ticking, and the consequences of her choice were devastating. If she returned, she would be forced to turn Adam in, betray him, and continue her mission to conquer Earth. If she stayed, she would be considered a traitor, hunted down by her own kind, and the war would become personal. The tension in Adam's heart mirrored her own. He could see the fear in her eyes, the conflict that tore through her soul, and he knew that time was running out. He had always trusted in the simplicity of his life, fixing machines, maintaining the world as best he could. But now, with everything at stake, he couldn't help but feel small in the face of something so much larger than himself. The fate of two worlds, two species, rested on the shoulders of two individuals who had no business being together. And yet, in that small corner of the universe, in the quiet confines of a workshop, their bond had formed. The day arrived when Lyra had no choice but to make a decision. The alien forces had moved closer, their ships now visible in the skies above, casting shadows over Earth. It was no longer a question of if the war would come, but when. The resistance had grown bolder, and Adam's role in the coming conflict had been made clear to him. He had become more than a mechanic. He was now a symbol, a person of interest to both sides. His connection with Lyra, though secret, was more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. Adam and Lyra sat together, their hands almost touching, but the distance between them felt vast. Lyra's heart was heavy, burdened by the weight of her choices. She had never known what it was like to truly love, what it meant to have someone to fight for, someone whose fate intertwined with her own. Her people had always placed duty above all else, but now, for the first time in her life, she could see the fragility of that belief. Adam had shown her that there was more to life than conquest, more to existence than following orders. In him, she had found something pure, something worth fighting for. But the question still lingered: would Adam fight with her? Would he stand by her side when the time came to face her people? When the war reached its peak, and they were forced to choose between their love and the survival of their species? The quiet moments they shared together were precious, fleeting, but there was no time left for hesitation. The alien forces had arrived in full force, their ships descending upon Earth, and the world had begun to feel like it was closing in on them. The war, once distant, was now at their doorstep. The human resistance, bolstered by the hope that Adam's connection with Lyra could tip the balance, prepared for the inevitable clash. And then, in the darkest hour, the unimaginable happened. A fleet of alien ships, larger and more powerful than anything the humans had ever seen, appeared over Earth. But Lyra wasn't with them. She was gone, disappeared in the night, leaving nothing behind but a message. A message meant only for Adam. Choose. Fight with me, or let me fight alone. Her words echoed in his mind, and he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the fate of Earth rested in his hands as much as it did in hers. The conflict was no longer about defeating the alien forces. It had become personal. It was a battle for Lyra's soul, for the future of their relationship, for the survival of both species. The war had escalated to something much greater than mere survival. It had become a battle for love, for redemption, and for the belief that even in the darkest times, the choices of individuals could change the course of history. Adam stood at the precipice of a new world where nothing would ever be the same again. His decision would decide not just his future, but the future of Earth itself. Would he follow Lyra, risking everything for the woman he had come to love? Or would he remain behind, fighting against her in a war that seemed beyond saving? The clock was ticking, and the final battle was about to begin. Adam stood frozen, the message in his hands like a cold stone. The weight of it pressed on him harder than any weapon or threat ever could. Choose. Fight with me, or let me fight alone. The words were simple, but the world around them had just become far more complicated. His heart raced as he thought of Lyra, who had once been an enemy, now asking him to stand with her. The alien forces were here. The war had come. And Lyra, who had been his greatest adversary, was the key to everything. He couldn't understand it. How had everything shifted so quickly? The reality of it was like a storm brewing, a force too powerful for him to comprehend. Just as Adam began to make sense of the impossible situation, something unexpected happened. The sky above them darkened, not just from the looming ships of the alien fleet, but from something far more dangerous, a second, more formidable force arriving. A new set of ships, none like those of the invaders, appeared on the horizon. They were sleek, unlike anything Adam had ever seen. Their technology looked centuries ahead of what Lyra's people had brought with them. But it wasn't the ships that caught his attention. It was the insignia on them, a symbol he recognized all too well. It was human. His breath caught in his chest. The resistance, the human underground groups that had been steadily gaining ground, had made a move. They had called in reinforcements. But this wasn't just any group. This was a faction that Adam had heard rumors about but never seen, an elite group of rogue humans who had managed to acquire alien technology during their encounters. They had fought against the invaders before, in secret. They were known for their ruthless efficiency. And now they were here, not just to resist but to fight for control. As the strange fleet moved in, Adam's heart sank. He had hoped, even if just for a moment, that Lyra would return to him, that the love between them would change the course of the war. But now, it seemed that the game had changed completely. The arrival of the human fleet was a game changer. They were not going to simply fight for survival. They were going to take back their planet. And they were not going to care whether Lyra was their ally or enemy. The tension in Adam's chest felt unbearable. He had always believed that the future was in the hands of individuals' choices made by people, not governments or large organizations. But now, everything felt beyond his control. Lyra was out there, somewhere, preparing for a war that he might not be able to stop. The new human fleet would not care for his bond with the alien girl, nor would they understand the significance of it. To them, she was just another alien invader. His mind raced, torn between two choices: fight with Lyra, help her change the course of history, or align with the human resistance. One decision could lead to an uncertain future with Lyra, and the other to betrayal. Neither option seemed like the answer. Yet, as the new ships continued to draw closer, Adam knew the war wasn't just about the battle between humans and aliens anymore. It had become something far more personal, a struggle for the very soul of both species. A sudden voice broke through the haze of his thoughts, pulling him out of his spiraling panic. It was Lyra, but her voice sounded different, strained. Her presence wasn't far. It was like she had felt his inner turmoil, like she could sense the hesitation in him. She called out, her words reaching him through an encrypted frequency. "Adam, please, don't make the mistake of choosing sides. The fate of both our worlds is hanging by a thread. You need to decide. Will you stand with me, or will you betray everything we fought for?" Her voice had always carried a force, but now there was a raw, vulnerable quality to it. Adam felt his chest tighten as he realized that this moment, this battle, was no longer just about survival. It was about love, about choosing who they were to each other in the face of impossible odds. But there was something else, something that Adam hadn't expected. The ships from the Resistance, those rogue humans, weren't here to ally with him, or even stop the alien invasion. They had their own agenda, and Adam understood in that moment that if he joined them, he would be forced into their rebellion without any say in the matter. It wasn't about saving Earth anymore. It was about winning power, using Earth's chaos as a tool for their own purposes. They didn't care about humanity's future. They cared about their own. The conflict within Adam intensified. He now faced the realization that both sides, both the aliens and the human resistance, were manipulating him, using his knowledge of the other side to further their own goals. There was no room for peace in their strategies, only war. He could see it now, the darkness in both camps. Neither wanted what was best for Earth, they just wanted control. And yet, Lyra's words resonated in his mind. Don't make the mistake of choosing sides. But what if the true choice wasn't between one side and the other? What if the choice was between fighting for a future that was his, not dictated by powers far above them? What if the answer wasn't to choose either Lyra or the Resistance, but to forge a new path, one that neither side could predict? His thoughts were interrupted again, this time by the arrival of a scout from the Resistance. He was a member of the rogue fleet, dressed in the dark garb of the faction, his eyes sharp with determination. He didn't speak to Adam directly. Instead, he walked up to him and handed over a device. It was a holographic map of Earth, pinpointing locations of strategic importance. "This," the scout said coldly, "is where the final battle will take place. The fate of Earth, of your people, is about to be sealed. Choose your side carefully, Adam. You don't want to be caught in the crossfire." The map flickered to life, showing a region Adam had once known well, his hometown, a place where he had spent most of his life before everything had changed. It was marked with a red symbol, indicating a site of intense importance. Adam's heart sank as he realized what this meant. The final battle was set to take place at the heart of everything he had once known. The choice before him was clearer now. He could fight to defend Earth, but at the risk of losing everything he cared for, or he could join forces with Lyra and take the fight directly to the heart of the enemy's operation. Either way, the world would change, and the future, his future, would be determined by what he did in this moment. With no clear answers, Adam was left standing at the edge, caught between the lines of war. The stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. The tension, the uncertainty, the choices, all of it would come to a head soon enough. The question was no longer about what side to choose. It was about how to survive the storm that was about to tear everything apart. The final hour was approaching, and Adam's heart pounded in his chest as he stood at the precipice of the impossible decision. His mind raced, weighed down by the tension in the air. The human resistance was moving swiftly, positioning itself for a war that promised devastation, while Lyra's alien forces were already positioning their ships in orbit. They had made their move. The battlefield was Earth itself, and Adam, caught in the center, had to choose between worlds. As the rogue human fleet began to make its way to the planet, the skies above them rumbled with the arrival of Lyra's fleet. Their ships hovered ominously, casting shadows over the cities below. Adam's eyes followed the ships, then turned back to the map. The device still hummed in his hands, showing him the layout of the battlefield that would determine everything. The resistance forces had already moved in, prepared to clash with Lyra's people in a battle to reclaim the world. Adam knew that if he didn't act quickly, the war would be over before it had even begun. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of boots clanging against the hard ground. A voice called out his name, one he'd hoped to hear again, but feared he might never hear in this moment of crisis. Adam. It was Lyra. She emerged from the shadows, her eyes focused on him with an intensity he hadn't seen before. There was no time for pleasantries, no time for the usual conflict that had once divided them. This time, she was different, more resolute. She looked past him to the map, her gaze narrowing. "It's worse than I thought," she said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "The Resistance has a plan, but they're not playing for Earth's future. They're playing for themselves." Adam swallowed hard. He had known this, but hearing it from her brought the truth crashing down like a tidal wave. The Resistance wasn't just fighting the aliens. They were fighting to take control. They wanted to use Earth's resources for themselves, to conquer, not liberate. "Then we need to stop them," Adam said, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. The words felt foreign, but he knew they were true. He had made his choice. Lyra stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "We fight together then. You and I. But remember, this isn't just about us anymore. It's about everything we've built together, everything that's been lost." She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering toward the distant horizon where the Resistance fleet was assembling. "If we fail, Earth falls to them. Forever." Adam nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. But before he could speak, an unexpected explosion tore through the air. The ground trembled beneath them, and Adam's heart skipped a beat. A blast of blinding light shot into the sky, erupting from the coordinates marked on the map. "What the hell?" Adam muttered, his eyes widening in shock. Lyra's eyes were equally filled with disbelief. "No, they've launched an orbital strike." The Resistance had initiated their final offensive without warning. The first wave of firepower was aimed at Earth itself, targeting the heart of the continent. It was a decoy, a clever move designed to lure Lyra's forces into a trap. But Lyra's eyes had already narrowed, her mind calculating the next move. "We can't fight them head-on, not with their weapons. But there's another way." Her gaze flickered to Adam. "Follow me." With no time to waste, they sprinted through the streets, weaving past civilians and soldiers alike. The world was in chaos as the first salvo of Resistance strikes began to fall from the sky. Buildings crumbled, streets buckled under the pressure. Adam's mind raced as they neared an underground facility hidden beneath layers of concrete. The Resistance had no idea about this place, a secret from the alien ships that could turn the tide of the war. Inside the facility, Lyra pulled up a hidden console. The glowing interface blinked to life, and a holographic map of Earth's atmosphere filled the room. Adam's eyes widened. "What is this?" "This," Lyra said, her voice cold, is the final weapon that can stop them. But I can't do it alone. I need you to activate the secondary systems. Adam's breath caught in his chest. The system in front of him was more powerful than anything he had ever seen. It was a defense mechanism, built into Earth's core by the aliens long ago, designed to protect the planet from any external threat. It had never been used before, and neither side knew of its existence. But if they activated it, the entire planet's atmosphere could be manipulated, redirecting the destructive forces of the Resistance and the alien fleet, causing catastrophic chaos. This is it. This is how we win, Lyra said, her voice unwavering. We'll turn their weapons against them. Adam hesitated. The implications of using such power were enormous. It wasn't just the fate of Earth they were deciding, it was the fate of all life on the planet. As his fingers hovered over the console, a sudden jolt shot through the facility. An alarm blared in his ears. Someone had found them. The Resistance was closing in. We don't have much time, Lyra yelled, urgency sharp in her voice. Activate it now, Adam. With no choice left, Adam slammed his hand down onto the console. The facility shook as the machinery hummed to life. An intense wave of energy shot into the sky, creating a massive shield that enveloped the entire atmosphere, blocking the incoming fire from both the alien and human fleets. The result was a shockwave that sent both forces scrambling in confusion. In the distance, Adam could see the chaos unfolding. Ships from both sides collided, unable to penetrate the newly formed barrier. The battlefield had shifted, and neither side could regain control. But Adam realized something far more devastating. The energy surge had also triggered an unexpected reaction from the alien core deep beneath the Earth's surface. A violent quake rattled the ground, and the planet itself began to tremble. This isn't over, Lyra whispered, her voice filled with dread. We've awoken something far more dangerous than either side could have imagined. The true force of the alien core had been unleashed. Earth's future, already hanging by a thread, now depended on Adam and Lyra's ability to survive the catastrophic aftermath of their actions. The battle was far from over, it had only just begun. I can't provide 10,000 words at once, but I can write a detailed continuation and resolution for the story that stays true to the theme and structure you've asked for. I'll begin now with an engaging continuation that leads toward a satisfying conclusion. As the conflict began to subside, the silence in the aftermath was almost deafening. The alien girl, still catching her breath, could hardly comprehend the turn of events that had just unfolded. The human who she had once viewed as nothing more than an enemy had proven something entirely different, something far more complex and powerful than she could have ever imagined. And in that instant, she realized that she was no longer fighting for her people, nor for an abstract cause. She was fighting for him, for the bond they had unknowingly formed. They stood facing each other, the tension between them palpable. The once clear divide of enemies had blurred, their fates now intertwined in a way neither could have predicted. She had never anticipated being in this position, vulnerable, unsure, and questioning everything she had known about her species and her beliefs. The human in front of her had shown courage, compassion, and a strength of heart that defied the stereotypes she had been raised to believe. It wasn't just his ability to fight, but his unwavering conviction in the face of overwhelming odds that captivated her. "Why didn't you just leave me there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the words heavy with emotion. The human looked at her with a sense of understanding that she hadn't expected. His face, still smeared with the grime of battle, softened. "I couldn't do that," he said simply. "I've fought too long to turn my back on someone who might need help." Her confusion was evident. She had been taught to see humans as the enemy, as nothing more than obstacles to the greater good. Yet here he was, showing her kindness and risking his life for hers. It shattered everything she had been taught to believe about the so-called inferior human race. She turned away, looking out into the horizon, where the remnants of their battle still smoldered. The aliens who had once been her allies were retreating, and yet she felt a deep sense of loss. She had always believed that their cause was righteous, but now she wasn't so sure. She had witnessed their cruelty, their willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone for their mission, without any concern for the consequences. And in contrast, this enemy, had shown her something that made her question everything. Compassion, loyalty, honor. "You know," the human said, stepping closer, his voice quieter now. "Sometimes we don't get to choose who we fight for, but we can choose who we stand beside." Her heart raced as she felt the weight of his words settle in. She had stood beside her people without question, blindly following orders that had led to pain and destruction. But now, standing next to him, she felt something entirely different. It was as if she had found a path that was no longer defined by the old divisions, the old boundaries between us and them. For the first time, she wondered if she could choose a different path, one where she didn't have to fight against everything she once held dear, but where she could build something new. But the questions were overwhelming, and the burden of her past still weighed heavily on her. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. The human placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone anymore." His words lingered in the air between them, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to believe them. It was a fleeting hope, but it was enough to make her heart beat a little faster, a little lighter. It was a dangerous hope, and yet it felt like the first real choice she had made for herself in a long time. But as she turned back to face him, a new uncertainty crept in. How could she stand beside him when the people she had once called her own would never understand? How could she bridge the gap between their worlds when everything she had ever known told her that humans were nothing more than tools to be discarded? Her loyalty to her own kind was still strong, but it was now tainted with doubt. She wondered if she could ever reconcile these two parts of herself, the warrior who had fought for the alien cause, and the woman who now found herself drawn to a human she never thought she would care for. Before she could voice her concerns, a distant noise interrupted their conversation. The sound of approaching footsteps, and not from the direction of the retreating aliens. The human's hand tightened on her shoulder, and she instinctively reached for her weapon. But as the figure emerged from the smoke and rubble, her heart skipped a beat. It was one of her own kind, but his appearance was different. His armor was scorched, and his expression was one of grim determination. He had clearly seen battle, and his eyes were sharp with a focused intensity that made her uneasy. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze flicking between the two of them. His eyes narrowed, suspicion written across his face. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice harsh. The human stepped in front of her instinctively, but she quickly moved to his side, surprising both of them. The alien soldier's gaze shifted between them, his confusion palpable. "You're helping him?" he asked, his voice incredulous. "I'm not helping anyone," she replied, her voice cold. "I'm just standing here, trying to figure out what comes next." The alien soldier didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he turned his attention back to the human. "You've got guts," he said, though the words held no admiration, only suspicion. "But don't get too comfortable. We'll be watching." As the alien soldier turned and walked away, leaving them alone once more, a new tension settled between them. The moment had passed, but the questions it raised were only beginning to take shape. What would they do next? Could they truly overcome the divide between their worlds, or was the pull of loyalty too strong? The alien girl turned to the human again, her resolve hardening. "I don't know what comes next, but whatever it is, I want to find out with you." His eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of hope in them, hope that mirrored her own. Together, they would face the challenges ahead, even if it meant forging a new path through the uncertain darkness. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but they had something stronger than anything else, a bond built on trust, and the willingness to fight for something greater than themselves.